This is the city, Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's a nice place to live and raise a family, apart from vampires, werewolves, ghouls, wizards, and the occasional demon. Like the rest of America, Scranton's got an uneasy live and let unlive relationship with the supernatural. But when a vamp puts the bite on an unwilling victim, or some witch casts the wrong kind of spell, that's when they call me. My name's Markowski. I carry a badge. Also a crucifix, some wooden stakes, a big vial of holy water, and a 9mm Beretta loaded with silver bullets. I was never a Boy Scout, but be prepared is still a good motto to live by, especially if you plan to keep on living. My last partner died in the line of duty, stabbed by a goblin during a liquor store holdup. The new guy they gave me, Carl Renfer, was still pretty green. He'd only had his detective shield for 7 months. That's the problem with breaking in a new partner. The only way to find out if you can rely on him is to be in a situation where you have to rely on him. And then if it turns out the guy hasn't got the right stuff, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. Maybe the kind that kills you. That was on my mind the night we got the call to investigate the deserted warehouse on North Kaiser Avenue. There'd been a report that some cultists might be conducting animal sacrifices inside. That's a felony all by itself, but I knew that determined devil worshippers never stop with animals. Sooner or later, they always move on to the next level, the kind that calls for the death of a human being, unless somebody stops them first. I parked near the warehouse and told Carl to go around back and secure the rear entrance. He gave me a look that said he was getting pretty tired of covering back doors, but didn't give me an argument. I waited 30 seconds for him to get around back, then tried the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, it was darker than midnight in a mine shaft. I thought I could hear voices chanting, but they weren't close. I took out my flashlight and flicked it on. Now I could see that the warehouse was divided into rooms by walls of cheap plywood. There were a couple of hallways set at right angles to each other. I followed the one where the chanting was coming from. After rounding a couple of corners, I saw a door with light flickering under it, the kind of light you get from candles. I turned the knob and opened the door slowly, praying the hinges wouldn't squeak. Turned out it wouldn't have mattered if I'd walked in singing the Star-Spangled Banner. The people inside were so intent on what they were doing, they didn't even notice me, at first. I quickly counted the house, and it looked like 13 of them, which figured. They were all dressed in the usual hooded gray robes that were probably the height of fashion in the 14th century. It only took me a second to realize that this coven had already moved beyond animal sacrifice. They'd gone all the way to the big time. The young woman they had on the floor, tied, spread-eagled, and gagged, looked like a streetwalker. No surprise there. Hookers have been easy prey for psychopaths ever since Jack the Ripper, if not before. It looked like they'd just finished cutting her throat. Her blood was flowing slowly across the concrete floor in the direction of the pentagram they'd painted there. These morons were trying to call up a demon, which is dangerous even when expert sorcerers do it. Conjuring a demon is a lot like grabbing a Bengal tiger by the tail. The slightest mistake, and you're lunch. I wondered if these cultists would succeed in their efforts, and if they did, whether they'd come to wish they'd failed. I'd just decided to sneak back out and call for backup when the stream of the woman's blood reached the pentagram. Almost immediately, the air at its center began to shimmer and spark, and I knew the conjuration had worked after all. Something from hell was on its way. I drew my weapon and stepped forward. Summoning a demon is a crime, and besides, there was no way to tell whether these fools had constructed their pentagram properly. If they hadn't, we were soon going to have a demon on the loose in my city, and I was not going to let that happen.
Police officer, stop the chanting and put your hands in the air. Do it!
A moment later, I realized that I had miscounted the cultists when I came in. There were actually 12 of them gathered around the pentagram. Number 13 must have been standing behind the door. I figured that out when he jumped on my back and threw a forearm around my throat and tried to grab my gun with his other hand. Most of the others were staring in awe at what had just appeared inside the pentagram. I only had time for a quick glance, but I saw that it was a Class 4 demon, which is about all you'd expect these stumblebums to call up. Not a heavyweight like Asmodeus or Baal, but still enough to cause plenty of trouble if it got loose. Two of the cultists were able to tear their eyes away from their visitor and head over toward me, presumably with the idea of giving their buddy on my back some help. I tried to bring my gun to bear on them, but number 13's hand on my wrist kept pulling it away. Since I couldn't shoot them, I decided to do the next best thing. I reached back and put my free hand around the neck of the guy who was still clinging to my back. Then I bent forward, fast, as far as I could, dropping to my knees at the same time. The cultist sailed over my head and crashed on his back to the floor in front of me. A hard rap on his temple from the butt of my gun made sure he was down for the count. I scrambled to my feet. I sensed movement behind me and turned just in time to catch another cultist's fist square in the face. The guy was no Muhammad Ali, but the punch was still enough to knock me off balance. I went down, more mad than hurt, and immediately started to get up again. I would have made it too, except something stronger than any human hand closed around my ankle, and in a heartbeat, I knew that my leg had breached the pentagram. The demon had me. In a flash, I considered my options, and none of them looked very good. I still had my gun, but shooting a demon is a waste of time, even with silver bullets. And Arnie Schwarzenegger in his prime couldn't have broken the grip that thing had on my leg. I was wondering whether my best bet might be putting the pistol in my own mouth and pulling the trigger, when Carl Renfer appeared behind one of the smaller cultists, grabbed him at the neck and crotch with those big paws of his, and heaved.
"Here's dinner, hellspawn!"
He yelled as he hurled the struggling man right at the demon's horned, misshapen head. The kid was stronger than he looked. Fortunately, Class 4 demons aren't very smart. If this one had been brighter, it would have hung on to me with one clawed hand and grabbed the airborne cultist with the other, acquiring 2 victims instead of 1. Instead, the stupid thing let go of me to grasp its new prey, and I rolled away from that pentagram faster than a scalded cat on speed. I got to my feet just in time to see the demon bite the cultist's head off and swallow it whole. I waved my gun at the rest of the Covenant and told them they were under arrest. It didn't take long for us to get them face down on the floor, fingers interlaced behind their necks. I looked at Carl. "You call for backup?" He shook his head. "Wasn't time, once I saw you were in trouble." "Okay, I'll do it now." I took out my radio, got the station, and described what we were dealing with. The dispatcher promised to send some help immediately, including an exorcist to send our infernal visitor back to hell where it belonged. As I clicked the radio off, I glanced toward the pentagram. The demon was still devouring what was left of the unfortunate cultist, right down to the gray robe. Demons are messy eaters, too. Gallows humor's pretty common among cops. Given the ugliness most of us see almost every day, it's either laugh or cry. And everybody knows that tough guys don't cry.
"He ate the outfit, too,"
Carl said, looking at the demon.
"Must have needed the extra fiber."
It wasn't all that funny, and definitely a 10 on the insensitivity scale, but I laughed. It was all I could do to stop it from turning into tears. When I finally got everything under control, I wiped my eyes with a handkerchief and looked at my new partner, who grinned back at me. The kid was gonna work out okay.